Please let me go." She was tied in the square for shame, but the cowboy untied her and asked. The year was 1867, and the frontier had a way of stripping a soul bare long before death ever touched it. Dawn had barely broken over town of Red Oak, yet already the square buzzed with the kind of cruel excitement small towns fed on. Dust swirled low across the ground, catching in the hems of skirts and the scuffed leather of boots. A wooden post stood in the center like a gallows missing its noose, and tied to it, wrists bound above her head, was a young woman whose voice had already broken from pleading. Her hair, once neatly braided, now hung in tangled strands across her face. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, exposing rope burns that glowed angry and raw. She could feel the townsfolk watching her, judging her, whispering about her as if she were already dead. Their stares pressed into her skin harder than the morning chill. Some stood with arms crossed, faces stiff and righteous. Others leaned forward slightly, hungry for the spectacle. Children peeked around their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed and curious, while the men spat tobacco and muttered the word thief, as though it were a brand seared into her. She swallowed hard, tasted blood at the back of her throat, and forced herself to speak even as her voice shook. "Please," she whispered. "Please let me go." Her plea drifted over the murmuring crowd, brushed the feet of the sheriff as he stepped forward, and vanished in the tension that hung like a storm about to strike. Sheriff Briggs was a thick man with a hard-set jaw and a badge that gleamed too proudly on his vest. He carried himself like a man who believed authority made him untouchable. When he stopped in front of her, he adjusted his hat and cleared his throat loud enough to draw silence from the crowd. He unrolled a paper, as though reading from it would cleanse him of the cruelty he was about to commit. "Eliza Hart," he announced, voice booming across the square. "You stand accused of stealing from Mr. Barrett's storehouse food, supplies, whiskey, and a silver watch. You're to remain tied here until sundown, whereupon you will be escorted out of town, banished from Red Oak, and forbidden to return under penalty of death." A gasp rippled through the crowd at the last part. Someone muttered a prayer. Someone else laughed. Eliza's knees weakened, and she gripped the rope above her to keep from collapsing. "I didn't steal anything," she rasped. "I swear it." A rock struck the ground near her feet. A woman hissed, "Liar," from the front row. Sheriff Briggs glanced at Eliza with eyes that saw only what they wanted to see. "Whether you did or didn't," he said, "this town's made its judgment." The words cut deeper than any blade could. She felt them in her bones, heavy and suffocating. The truth sat on her tongue like a buried secret clawing to escape, but she knew no one here would believe it. Not when the most powerful rancher in Red Oak was the one who accused her. Not when he could twist the law with a handful of coins and a well-timed threat. She shut her eyes to keep from crying again, but tears forced their way through anyway, trailing down her dirt-streaked cheeks. Somewhere within her chest, hope cracked like thin ice beneath heavy boots. A memory flickered through her mind, her father's laugh echoing in the yard, the scent of pine, the warmth of home before sickness stole him away. Then another memory, harsher. Mr. Barrett cornering her in his store, his fingers gripping her arm too tightly as he whispered promises she never wanted to hear. She'd pushed him. He'd fallen back. His pride had been wounded deeper than any physical injury. The next day, he claimed she had stolen from him. No trial, no chance to speak. Just the sheriff's hand on her shoulder and cold iron clamping around her wrists. A fly landed on her cheek. She jerked her head to shake it off, but the movement only made the rope dig deeper. The pain burned like fire. Her breath trembled. Then the murmurs changed. Boot steps echoed against the wooden walkway. Slow, heavy, deliberate. The crowd parted the way water gives to a passing ship. People shifted, eyes widening, voices lowering. Eliza forced her gaze upward, blinking to the haze of sun and exhaustion. A tall figure moved toward the post, dressed in a dust-worn duster coat that dragged near his boots. His hat shadowed his face, but his stride carried a weight that spoke of long roads and dangerous choices. When he stopped, she finally saw him clearly. Kane Walker. She'd heard his name whispered across Red Oak before. Stories of a man who'd fought in the war and returned with scars that didn't show on skin alone. A man who kept himself, who traded with ranchers and sometimes rode out for weeks with nothing but a rifle and a horse. Some said he'd killed 20 men. Others said he'd saved twice as many. Either way, he was the kind of man the sheriff didn't like having near his authority. Kane's gaze swept over Eliza's bound wrists, the bruise on her cheek, the way she struggled to stay upright. Something sharpened in his expression, though he said nothing. Sheriff Briggs cleared his throat loudly, trying to reassert control. "This ain't your business, Walker," he said. "Town justice don't concern drifters." Kane didn't flinch. "That what you call this?" he asked, voice low, rough as gravel, but steady enough to hush the square. "Justice. She stole," Briggs snapped. "That's the end of it. She looks half dead," Kane said. "That the punishment for theft now?" Briggs stiffened. "I said it's not your concern. Move along." Kane stepped closer, his shadow falling across Eliza like a shield. "Untie her," the crowd gasped. Briggs stared at Kane, disbelief twisting into something uglier. "I don't think you understand, Walker." Mr. Barrett himself filed the charge. "This woman broke the law, and this town won't sit back while some wanderer interferes." Kane's eyes narrowed. "I'm not interfering," he said. "I'm stopping something that never should have started." His hand drifted toward his belt, fingers hovering near the hilt of a long knife strapped there. Briggs reacted instantly, stepping back and resting his hand near his revolver. Tension crackled in the air. Someone whispered, "There's going to be blood." Another murmured, "Walker's crazy enough to do it." Eliza's heart pounded so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Fear for herself twisted into fear for the stranger now standing between her and death. Kane's voice dropped, barely above a whisper. "I won't tell you twice." Briggs hesitated, jaw ticking as he calculated his options. The crowd waited, breathless. Kane didn't blink. In one swift motion, so fast the air seemed to snap, Kane drew his knife, the blade flashing in the sun. A single slash cut clean across the rope. The tension released, and Eliza's arms fell forward as she stumbled into him. He caught her easily, steadying her before she could collapse. Briggs shouted, "Walker!" and reached for his gun. Kane's revolver was already drawn. "Don't," Kane said coldly. The sheriff froze. Men in the crowd shifted uneasily, unsure whether to run or stay still. Kane holstered his weapon with controlled precision, turned to Eliza, and lifted her onto his horse waiting nearby. She tried to speak, tried to thank him or question him, but the words tangled in her throat. "Hold on," he said softly. Gunshots cracked behind them as Kane spurred the horse into motion. The animal lunged forward, hooves kicking up dust as they bolted out of the square. Townsfolk dove for cover. Briggs cursed loudly and ordered men to give chase. Eliza clung to Kane's coat, her fingers trembling against the worn leather. The wind tore at her hair. The world blurred around her. They raced through the alley between the saloon and the blacksmith's workshop, the echo of gunfire bouncing off wooden walls. A bullet splintered a barrel beside them. Kane didn't slow. He leaned low over the horse's neck, guiding it with expert ease. They burst past the last row of buildings and into the open stretch behind town, where the land rolled out toward the foothills. Eliza sucked in a breath that stung her lungs but filled her with strange, fragile hope. After several minutes, once the shouts behind them had faded into nothing but memory, Kane guided the horse into a narrow ravine. He dismounted, lifted Eliza down, and led her toward a small storage shed tucked behind a fallen pine. The place smelled faintly of old hay and rust, but it felt safer than anything she'd known in days. Kane shut the door behind them, casting the shed in shadows pierced only by thin streaks of morning light through cracks in the boards. Eliza leaned against the wall, her legs trembling beneath her. Her wrists throbbed where the rope had bitten them. She winced and rubbed them gently. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them pulsed with tension, confusion, and something else, something fragile and unspoken. Finally, Kane removed his hat, ran a hand through his wind-tangled hair, and looked at her with eyes that seemed to see far deeper than she expected. "You hurt anywhere else?" he asked. Eliza shook her head, though tears stung her eyes. "Why did you help me?" she whispered. "You don't even know me." Kane studied her a long moment before answering. "Didn't need to know you," he said quietly. Just needed to know what they were doing was wrong. She swallowed hard. They won't stop looking. I know. You shouldn't have risked yourself. Kane's expression darkened, though his voice stayed gentle. Wasn't a risk, he said. Not compared to leaving you there. Eliza stared at the dirt floor, overwhelmed by gratitude and fear tangled into knots inside her chest. His kindness was something she didn't know how to meet. Not after everything that had happened. Not after the hands that once claimed to help only hurt her instead. She lifted her gaze slowly, searching his face. What happens now? Kane stepped closer, his presence steady and unyielding. Now, he said, you tell me what they really did to you. His words struck a place inside her she had tried desperately to keep hidden. Her throat tightened. Her hands trembled. But the question sat there, waiting, gentle, patient, and impossibly heavy. And for the first time since the nightmare began, Eliza felt the faintest flicker of something she thought she'd lost forever. A chance. A voice. A way out. She drew a shaky breath, lifted her chin, and prepared to tell him everything. The shed's walls seemed to breathe with her as Eliza tried to steady her voice. Kane stood a few paces away, arms crossed loosely, waiting without pushing. Outside, the wind shifted to the ravine like a whisper urging her to speak. She rubbed her raw wrists once more, then finally met his gaze. I didn't steal from Barrett, she said softly. I never touched a thing. Kane nodded once, as if he'd already guessed. Tell me what happened. Her breath shuddered as she drew it in. She expected judgment, doubt, disbelief. Everything she'd endured these past days. But Kane's eyes held only patience. He wanted me, she murmured. Not my help. Not my work. Just me. When I said no, he acted like it was an insult he needed the whole town to pay for. Her throat tightened. I pushed him away. Harder than I meant to. He hit the crates behind him. After that, he claimed I stole from him. I don't know what he took or hid, but he said I did it, and everyone believed him. The silence thickened. Kane's jaw flexed, anger stirring behind his calm exterior. Barrett's the kind who buys loyalty, not earns it. Eliza felt tears threatening again, but blinked them back. I tried to run, she whispered. Sheriff Briggs caught me at the creek before sunrise, said Flynn confirmed my guilt. She let out a bitter laugh. Guilt, like that mattered to anyone. Kane moved to check through the cracks in the boards, watching for movement beyond the ravine. They'll come this way, he said. Not yet, but they will. Eliza stepped closer. Why, help me? She asked again, voice barely above a breath. Men like you don't just take on a town for nothing. Kane didn't turn, but his shoulders rose slowly with a deep breath. Maybe I've seen too much of what happens when good folks are silent, he said. Maybe I've been silent myself too many times. His words tugged at something inside her, something sore but alive. Suddenly he stiffened. We move, he said. Eliza's heart leapt. They're coming. Not yet, he answered, grabbing the saddlebag from the corner. But the sheriff's no fool. If we stay put, we're boxed in. He opened the shed door, just enough to peer out. The ravine lay quiet for now. We ride north. Storm's coming, but it'll cover our tracks. She hesitated only a moment before following him out. Snowflakes drifted in the air, not many, but enough to warn of worse to come. The sky had dulled to a hard gray, the kind that swallowed warmth. Kane's horse stamped its hooves anxiously, sensing the shift in the wind. Kane helped her mount, then swung into the saddle behind her. His arm came around lightly to steady her, and though she flinched at the touch, she held herself still. Trust was a strange, fragile creature she wasn't used to carrying. Hold on, he murmured. They rode out of the ravine and into the open land, the rising wind biting at their faces. The silence of the wilderness wrapped around them, wide, empty, stretching farther than fear could reach. The storm moved in quicker than expected. Snow thickened, swirling in frantic gusts, stinging her eyes. The horse pushed forward, struggling for footing as ice formed across the ground. Kane guided them toward the shelter of the hills. Storm will bury the tracks if it gets bad enough, he shouted against the wind. But we've got to get to the ridge. Eliza clung to the saddle horn, her fingers numb. Why the ridge? It splits before the canyon, Kane replied. Posse can't track us if they lose our trail there. The storm slammed into them harder, wind wailing like the spirits of lost wanderers. The horse faltered. Kane pulled the reins hard, coaxing it forward inch by inch. Snow coated his coat and hat. Eliza could barely see through the stinging white. We're not going to make it, she cried. We will, Kane said. Lean low. Keep your weight centered. A sharp blast of wind pushed them sideways, nearly toppling them off the horse. Kane steadied their balance, his arm braced around her. Minutes passed, maybe hours, time blurred by the storm's fury. Her limbs went numb. Her lips trembled. She felt the ache of cold deep in her bones. The world narrowed to the rhythmic lurch of the horse and the grit of Kane's voice guiding it. Then her vision bubbled with stars. She heard Kane call her name, though she didn't remember telling it to him. His voice sounded far away. The cold seeped past her skin, past her muscles, reaching her heart like a fist tightening. Then darkness swallowed her. When she opened her eyes again, warmth flickered near her face. She blinked, tried to focus on the glowing orange of a fire reflecting off stone walls. The air smelled of smoke, snow, and saddle leather. A low wind moaned outside, its echoes muffled by the rocky shelter. She lay on a bed of pine branches inside a shallow cave. A blanket covered her, Kane's blanket. She realized in the rough texture and faint scent of him. Her clothes were still damp, but her skin felt warmer. The fire crackled steadily, pushing back the cold. Kane knelt beside her, holding a strip of cloth soaked in warm water. Relief loosened his expression when her eyes finally met his. Good, he murmured. Thought you were going for a moment. Eliza tried to sit up, but pain lanced through her shoulder. Kane gently pressed her back down. Easy. You took a bad fall. I fainted, she whispered. You froze, he corrected. Storm like that'll kill a strong man, let alone someone already half-starved. She stared into the flames, shame and gratitude twisting tightly together. I didn't mean to slow you down. Kane scoffed softly. If I cared about slow, I'd have left Red Oak a long time ago. His words were gruff, but his hands were gentle as he cleaned the rope burns on her wrists, wrapping them in strips torn from his spare shirt. She winced. Sorry. Don't apologize for being hurt, he said. Eliza watched him work, noticing details she hadn't before. The long scar crossing his forearm, the way he avoided looking directly at her when he spoke, the quiet heaviness in his movements. She wondered what kind of life carved a man into this shape. Kane, she whispered, you said you'd seen too much of this before. He paused. For a moment, the only sound was the fire's crackle. Then he leaned back, arms resting on his bent knees. War did things to men, he said slowly. Made us choose between living with what we'd seen or leaving ourselves behind. He stared at the cave floor, jaw tight. My wife, she didn't live long after I came back. I wasn't the man she remembered. I wasn't the man she deserved. Eliza swallowed, the ache in his voice stirring something deep inside her. I'm sorry. He shook his head. Don't be. Some wounds don't heal. You just learn to carry them without bleeding on everything you touch. Her voice softened. Is that why you ride alone? Kane looked at her, really looked, and she saw the truth set on his eyes like a shadow lifting. I ride alone because it's easier than being reminded of what I couldn't protect. Eliza felt the weight of his confession settle between them, heavy but grounding. For the first time since she'd met him, she didn't feel like a burden. She felt like someone he trusted. They sat in silence until the storm's howl softened into a distant hum. But peace in the wilderness never lasted long. A sudden crack of a branch snapped both their heads toward the cave mouth. Kane's hand went immediately to his gun. He motioned for her to stay down. Footsteps crunched through the snow, slow, cautious, deliberate. Eliza's heart pounded as shadows shifted just beyond the firelight. Kane moved like a predator, silent and sure. He pressed himself to the wall near the entrance. The footsteps drew closer. A faint whisper of voices carried on the wind. Tracks end here, one man said. Another replied, Walker's gotta be close. Barrett wants a girl alive. Sheriff wants Walker dead. Eliza's breath froze in her chest. Kane mouthed one word. Run. She shook her head fiercely. I won't leave you. He stepped closer, voice barely audible. You don't have to go far, just far enough. Once they fire on me, they'll chase. You run behind the ridge. I'll find you after. Before she could argue, a shot rang out. The bullet sparked against the rock near Kane's shoulder. He dove behind a boulder, firing back quick enough to force the men outside to scramble for cover. Kane! Eliza cried. Go! He shouted. She hesitated only a moment before slipping toward the narrow back crack in the cave wall that Kane had noticed earlier. She squeezed through just as another bullet echoed inside the cave. Snow blinded her as she emerged into the open frozen air behind the ridge. Gunfire thundered from inside the cave. She pressed herself flat against a stone, heart racing. Minutes stretched like hours. She wanted to scream, run back, do something, but fear held her frozen. When the gunfire finally stopped, the silence tore through her. Then she heard it, a single horse galloping hard, hooves pounding snow. Kane burst from front of the cave, riding bareback on the posse's own horse, firing behind him as two men scrambled to follow. His coat whipped in the wind, snow flying from his hair. He spotted her instantly and veered toward her. On! He shouted, grabbing her hand and swinging her onto the horse behind him. She wrapped her arms around him as he urged the horse toward the river ahead. The ice cracked beneath the horse's weight, but Kane didn't slow. Hold tight, he yelled. The river roared beneath them as the ice gave way, plunging them into freezing water. Eliza gasped, clinging to Kane as the current ripped them downstream. Shots echoed above, bullets slapping the water around them. The river dragged them under, flipping them, tossing them like rag dolls. Kane's grip on her never loosened. When they finally surfaced, sputtering and shivering, the posse's figures were distant shadows on the bank. The river carried them far from danger, into a stretch of land untouched by pursuit. Kane dragged them to shore, coughing, breath-heaving. Eliza collapsed beside him, trembling violently. You saved me again, she whispered. Kane shook his head slowly, lying back against the muddy bank. We saved each other. For the first time since her nightmare began, she believed him. And somewhere beyond the river, through the thick grove of frostbitten trees, the faint glow of a lantern flickered, guiding them toward whatever came next. The night settled over the frontier like a shroud, thick with cold and the lingering scent of dust and gunpowder. No lantern burned bright enough to chase away the dread that had been building since afternoon, when the sheriff's men rode through town asking after the woman who'd once been tied in the square like a criminal. Folks had pointed them in every direction except the one she'd taken, and most did so with a quiet defiance glowing behind their eyes. The townspeople had seen enough injustice for 1 year. Enough hangings. Enough shame. Enough fear. Ilera knew all this as she and Colt made their slow way toward the ridge overlooking Cedar Hollow. Her breath came out in small bursts. The freezing air stung her lungs. The wind cut like a whip and carried the faint howl of coyotes somewhere far beyond the tree line. Colt rode slightly ahead, shoulders tense, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver like it had grown there. He had barely spoken for an hour, and when he did, his voice was overly calm. Too calm for a man who had promised he wouldn't let the law drag her back to that cursed wooden post. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that the man who'd cut her ropes lifted her trembling body from the dirt and whispered, "You're safe now." Wouldn't fail her now. But the whisper of fear gnawed at her ribs like a starving creature. Safety was a fleeting thing in the West. Men lied. Promises broke. The world tilted fast. The trail dipped into a narrow pass. And Colt finally brought his horse to a stop. He dismounted without a word. Ilera followed, the ground crunching beneath her boots, her fingers stiff from gripping the reins. She watched him scan the ridge, then the open plain behind them, checking for movement. He wasn't just cautious. He was expecting something. "You ain't telling me something," she said, her voice trembling despite her best effort to sound strong. "What did you hear back in town?" Colt straightened slowly. Moonlight caught the scar running down his cheek, sharpening its edges. "A name," he said. A name I prayed I'd never hear again. Her stomach nodded. Whose name? Marshal Reddin Holt. The sound of it made her blood go cold. She'd never met the man, but she knew the stories. Everyone did. A marshal who bent the law until it snapped under his boot. A man with a penchant for public punishment and a reputation for turning the innocent guilty. If he was coming, then her past wasn't just chasing her. It was riding hard and fast. He's after you? Colt asked softly. Elara nodded once, her throat too tight for words. Why? She closed her eyes. Because I told the truth. The confession hung between them like a storm cloud. Colt didn't speak. He didn't need to. Elara felt the weight of his stare, not judgmental, but heavy with questions he already seemed to fear the answers to. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if the memories could be held back through sheer force. Marshal Holt's men took advantage of the girls at Briar Creek. You know those stories. They're not rumors. They're real. I saw him drag a girl by her hair behind the barn. I saw the bruises, the fear, the way they went silent whenever he walked by. Her breath shuddered. I spoke up. I told the preacher. I told Mrs. Langer. And someone told Holt. And he made an example of you. Colt said quietly. Elara nodded. Tied me in the center of town. Called me a liar. A temptress. Said I'd ruined the reputation of honorable men. Her voice cracked. He would have done worse if you hadn't come. Colt's jaw worked as if he were chewing stone. We're not going back. His words were firm, but his eyes betrayed something else. Fear, or maybe understanding of the magnitude of the enemy coming their way. A distant rumble cut through the cold night. Hooves. Many. Too many for a simple posse. Colt cursed under his breath and grabbed her hand. We move. They rode fast, almost too fast for the narrow trail. Branches cracked, rocks scattered under their horses' hooves. The wind tore through Alara's hair, stinging her eyes. But the sound behind them grew louder, sharper, angrier. Reddin Holt didn't pursue like a lawman. He pursued like a hunter. The moon slid behind a cloud, plunging the pass into near darkness. Colt reached into his saddlebag and tossed her a small pistol. Elara stared at it. I've never... You will tonight, he said, his voice a low growl. The first gunshot rang out like thunder. Bark exploded from a tree beside her. Another shot followed, then 3 more. Colt whipped his horse sharply around a bend, placing himself between her and the incoming fire. Keep low, he shouted. Ride or die. She rode. Fear surged through her veins like wildfire, but so did something else. Anger. The kind she'd buried for months. The kind that burned away shame. The kind that tasted like survival. They reached an abandoned mining shack at the base of a cliff. Colt pulled her inside, slammed the door, and shoved a crate against it. The shack groaned under the wind, but it was shelter, maybe temporary, maybe fatal, but shelter nonetheless. Colt crouched by the window, watching shadows move in the distance. They got at least 8 riders, he whispered. Maybe 10. Elara swallowed hard. Can we take them? Not all. His honesty didn't break her spirit. It steadied it. There was something profoundly grounding about a man who refused to lie, even when the truth was a threat. Why are you doing this? She whispered. He didn't look at her. Because I know what it's like to be hunted for something that wasn't your fault. She moved closer. What did they do to you? Colt exhaled a slow, painful breath. Reddin Holt blamed me for killing his deputy. Said I shot him during a raid. Truth is, Holt killed him himself. Didn't want witnesses. I just happened to be there. The puzzle pieces snapped together. Their fates weren't just crossing, they were braided. A splintering crack shattered the moment. The door shook violently. Holt's men were ramming it. Colt fired through the window. Shouts rose outside. Hooves scattered. A bullet tore through the wall inches from Alara's shoulder. She dropped to the floor, heart pounding. Reload! Colt shouted, sliding a handful of rounds toward her. Her fingers trembled, but she did as told. The pistol felt heavier now, something terrifying and necessary. Another crash. The crate moved. The door buckled. Colt grabbed her wrist, his grip fierce. When that door breaks, you shoot at anything that comes in. You hear me? Elara nodded, breath ragged. The door burst open. 3 men charged inside. Colt shot the first straight through the chest. Elara fired at the second, missing once, twice, then landing a bullet in his shoulder. He fell screaming. Colt tackled the third, smashing him into the wall. Elara fired again, the sound too loud, too final. Silence fell for a heartbeat. 2 heartbeats. Then a slow, mocking clap echoed from outside. Marshal Reddin Holt stepped into the doorway. Tall, broad, wearing a long black duster that fluttered like the wings of a crow. His face was pale beneath the brim of his hat, eyes cold as river stone. Well, he drawled. A runaway liar and a disgraced cowboy. What a pair. Colt raised his gun. Holt shot first. The bullet grazed Colt's arm, spinning him back with a grunt. Elara screamed and fired blindly, but Holt stepped aside with eerie calm. "You've made this hard on yourself, girl," Holt said, aiming at her. "Could have ended clean." "Quiet." Colt lunged between them, just as Holt pulled the trigger. The shot rippled through the shack. Dust rained from the rafters. Elara froze, expecting pain, but Colt stood still, unharmed. Holt cursed. His gun jammed. Colt seized a moment and tackled him. They crashed through the doorway and into the dirt. The fight was brutal. Fists, knees, desperate grunts. Both men fueled by rage older than the night. Elara ran outside, clutching her pistol. Holt had Colt pinned, one hand squeezing his throat, the other reaching for a fallen revolver. Elara aimed. Her hands shook. Her breath rattled. Her heart pounded so loud she could barely hear Colt choking beneath Holt's grip. "Shoot!" Colt gasped, but the world blurred. She saw the square, the ropes, the faces, the shame. Holt's laugh. Her vision steadied. Her jaw tightened. She fired. The recoil jolted her entire body. Holt collapsed sideways, gripping his leg, blood soaking his pants. He wasn't dead, but he was wounded. Colt staggered to his feet, breathing hard. "We need to finish this before he calls a rest." Elara swallowed. "Finish him, how?" Colt looked at her with something both sorrowful and certain. "The only way he won't chase you again is if he don't get up." She stared at Holt, writhing, hatred burning in his eyes even through the pain. She raised her gun, but a distant whistle cut through the night. Both she and Colt froze. On the ridge above them, torches appeared. 1, 2, 5, 10, more. Silhouettes, riders, dozens. A voice boomed across the canyon. "Marshal Holt, you alive down there?" Colt cursed softly. He brought the full regiment. Elara's blood went ice cold. Holt grinned through the pain. "You're both dead come dawn." Colt grabbed her hand. "Run." They fled into the darkness, the sound of distant hooves gathering behind them, an army descending. And somewhere in that vast, merciless night, the frontier held its breath, waiting for the next battle, waiting to see who would survive long enough to tell the tale, waiting for what came next.